The prairie was quiet that evening, the wind moving lazily across the tall grass as the rancher rode home from checking the north fence line. His horse moved steady under him, until it suddenly shied, ears pricked, nostrils flaring. The rancher pulled the reins and scanned the riverbank. That's when he saw her. A figure lay sprawled in the dirt, half hidden by the reeds. He swung down fast, boots sinking into the damp soil. It was a woman, bruised, her dress torn and dusty like she'd ridden for days. Her face was pale under the streaks of grime, and her lips were cracked from thirst. When her eyes fluttered open, he saw something in them that stopped him cold, raw desperation. "Please, help me," she whispered, voice hoarse as if every word cost her strength. The rancher didn't hesitate. He slid his arms under her and lifted her into his saddle like she weighed nothing at all. Her head rested against his chest as he mounted behind her, spurring his horse toward home. Back at the ranch, he gave her water first. She drank like a soul saved from hell. Then food, soft bread and broth. He laid her on his bed, clean sheets smelling of sun and soap. She barely spoke, only whispered her name once before exhaustion claimed her. Anna. As she drifted into sleep, her fingers curled around his hand, clinging like she'd been lost too long. The rancher sat there, staring at the firelight flickering across her face, wondering what kind of storm had driven her to his land in such a state. He didn't know it then. Didn't know that saving her meant his quiet, ordered life was over, that soon, his ranch would echo with voices, with trouble, and with choices that would change him forever. At dawn, the rancher woke to a sound that didn't belong, the steady thunder of hoofbeats rolling across the open plains. He was on the porch in seconds, boots crunching on the frostbitten boards, rifle in hand. Through the morning haze, shapes emerged. 5 of them at first, no, 4, riding hard and fast. Horses lathered in sweat, manes flying like banners in the wind. When they pulled up in the yard, dust curling around their boots, the rancher's grip on the rifle tightened. They weren't men. They were women, each one fierce-eyed and armed, guns slung low, faces hard as stone. Their clothes were trail-worn, their mouths set in grim lines. The tallest swung down first, spurs clinking as she closed the distance between them. "We're looking for someone," she said, voice like steel scraping rock. "Anna. She here?" Before the rancher could answer, a sound stopped them all, a door creaked, and soft footsteps stumbled across the porch. "Anna." She stood in the doorway, pale and trembling, her dress hanging loose but her eyes bright with recognition. "Clara," her voice broke as she said the name. The tallest woman, Clara, didn't speak. She ran. And then so did the others, crashing into Anna with a force that nearly knocked her off the porch. They clung to her, tears streaking down. Faces that hadn't softened in years. The rancher stepped back, giving them room. It wasn't his place. He figured they'd all ride out together once the hugging and crying was done. But they didn't. As the day stretched on, the sisters didn't leave. They whispered in tight circles, eyes scanning the horizon, hands never far from their guns. At supper, they ate little and spoke even less, their ears tuned to every creak of the house, every howl of the wind. By nightfall, the rancher understood. They weren't passing through. They were digging in, like women who had run too far and had no intention of running anymore. And for the first time, the rancher wondered what kind of trouble Anna had brought to his land, and whether his ranch was about to become a battleground. The next few days passed like a storm that never broke, quiet on the surface, but heavy with the weight of something coming. The rancher rode into town for supplies and found the air thick with whispers. At the saloon, men hunched over tables, voices low. A band of riders came through, the barkeep muttered when the rancher pressed for news. A skin, about 5 sisters. Said they belonged to McGraw. The name dropped like a stone into a still pond. McGraw. The rancher had heard it before, a name that stank of blood and smoke. An outlaw whose brand of justice came from the barrel of a gun. The story was that after their father died, McGraw laid claim to everything he owned, including his daughters. The sisters had run, and McGraw had sworn to bring them back, dead or alive. By the time the rancher rode back to his land, his jaw was set like iron. He found the sisters in the yard, sleeves rolled up, mending a section of broken fence as if they'd worked ranches all their lives. Another was hauling water from the well, skirts hitched, sun catching the sweat on her brow. For a moment, he almost forgot the danger closing in. "You all act like this place is yours," he said finally, swinging down from his horse. His tone was rougher than he meant. Clara looked up from the post she was hammering, her gray eyes steady. "Maybe it feels like it." The rancher tossed the news like a hammer blow. "McGraw's men were in town this morning. They're close." The air changed. Hammers stilled. Water sloshed from the bucket. Every face turned to him, faces that had softened for Anna now went hard as granite. "We figured as much," Clara said. She stood tall, her hands curling into fists. "We've run too long. If he comes," her voice didn't waver. "We fight. And we'll fight here." The rancher stared at her. "You know what that means? My land becomes a battlefield." Clara stepped closer, her shadow cutting across the dirt. "You saved Anna's life. That makes you part of this whether you like it or not." He opened his mouth to argue, but the look in her eyes stopped him cold. It wasn't desperation. It was resolve. The kind a man couldn't shake even if he tried. That night, as the wind whispered through the cottonwoods, the rancher walked the fence line with his rifle. His land, once silent and empty, now bristled with tension. There were more boots in his bunkhouse, more guns leaning by the door, and more firelight flickering in the windows. He'd taken in a stranger out of kindness. Now he was standing on the edge of war. It came at sunset, the sky bleeding red over the prairie like a warning. The rancher stood on the porch, the boards creaking under his boots as he stared toward the ridgeline. His rifle rested easy in his hands, but his jaw was tight. He'd seen war before, and he knew the quiet before a storm. Then it hit, thunder of hooves rolling down the valley, dust rising like smoke. McGraw's men, a dozen strong, rifles glinting in the dying light. They fanned out across the yard, their leader riding tall in a black duster, face twisted into a cruel grin. "Hand 'em over." McGraw's voice cracked like a whip, cutting through the evening stillness. "You got no stake in this, rancher. Move aside and live." The rancher didn't move. Slowly, he raised his shotgun and planted his boots on the top step. "They're under my roof," he said, voice calm as steel. "That makes 'em my fight." McGraw sneered, spitting in the dust. "Your funeral." Before the echo died, Clara stepped forward, rifle braced against her shoulder. The other sisters flanked her, skirts whipping in the wind, eyes like fire. For a moment, the men hesitated, because these weren't cowering women. These were warriors. Then the world erupted. Gunfire split the evening sky, muzzle flashes sparking against the dark. Horses screamed. The rancher dropped the first rider clean, the blast of his shotgun booming across the yard. Clara fired next, sending a man tumbling from his saddle. Bullets tore splinters from the porch as the sisters moved like shadows, darting, firing, reloading without panic. The youngest, Emma, dragged Anna behind the trough, then knelt to lay down cover fire. Another sister vaulted a fence, using the corral for cover as she picked off a rider circling wide. The air stank of gunpowder and sweat, of blood and dust. The rancher felt the burn of a bullet graze his arm but kept firing, teeth clenched. He'd fought beside men in the war who didn't have half the grit these women showed tonight. Minutes felt like hours. One by one, McGraw's men hit the dirt or bolted for the hills. Soon only McGraw remained, his face twisted with fury as he sat his horse, staring down 5 determined women and 1 unyielding rancher. "You'll regret this," he spat. The rancher thumbed back the hammer of his shotgun and met his gaze without blinking. "Ride," he said. "Or die." McGraw's lip curled, but his eyes flicked to his fallen men, then back to the unwavering line before him. With a curse, he wheeled his horse and galloped into the dark, leaving a trail of rage behind him. Silence fell, broken only by the ragged breath of those still standing. The sisters lowered their guns slowly. The rancher stepped off the porch, scanning the yard littered with guns, horses, and men who'd thought this would be easy. It wasn't over, not for good. But for tonight, the ranch still stood. And so did they. When the dust finally settled and the last hoofbeats faded into the horizon, the ranch was quiet again, but it was no longer the same quiet as before. The bodies of McGraw's men were hauled away by townsfolk, and word spread faster than prairie fire. The rancher had stood his ground against an outlaw, and 5 fearless women fought beside him. The sisters didn't leave that night. They worked through the silence, patching bullet holes in the porch, sweeping spent shells from the yard, and tending the cattle that had scattered during the fight. The rancher expected them to pack up at first light, but morning came and they were still there, mending fences as if they belonged. Days turned into weeks. The old house, once empty and cold, now carried the sound of laughter drifting from the kitchen. The sisters cooked hearty meals, humming tunes as they stirred pots, and the smell of fresh bread filled rooms that hadn't seen warmth in years. They repaired the barn roof, scrubbed the floors, and planted flowers along the path, things the rancher never thought about but suddenly couldn't imagine living without. One evening, Clara stood by the corral, her silhouette framed by the burning colors of sunset. She leaned on the rail, gazing at the horizon. "We didn't mean to stay this long," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of promises broken and lives rebuilt. The rancher joined her, resting an arm on the same rail. A small smile tugged at his weathered face. "Didn't mean to rescue anyone either," he replied, his tone warm with quiet humor. Then, after a pause, he added, "But maybe the ranch was waiting for you." She looked at him, eyes shimmering with something unspoken. Gratitude, maybe hope. Behind them, the sisters' laughter floated from the porch, mingling with the evening breeze. From that day on, the ranch was never just his. Folks in town whispered about it for years, the tale of a hard man who saved a stranger and found something better than solitude. They called it luck. Others called it fate. But the rancher just called it home.